The throne room was blinding, not just in light, but in spectacle. Polished ivory columns stretched toward a ceiling painted with constellations that no longer guided anyone. Gold trimmed every edge of the room like veins in a dying body. Cushions of sapphire silk lined the seats where the nobles lounged, whispering behind jeweled hands, their robes rustling like dry leaves. Incense curled through the air, sweet with crushed myrrh and rosewood, trying to cover the stench of sweat and fear. The doors groaned open. 2 guards entered, dragging something small between them, not a thing, but a girl. Barefoot, filthy, wrists raw and bleeding from 2 tight irons. Her head was bowed only because the guards pushed it down. Otherwise, she walked as if she had forgotten how to crawl. Her name, though no one spoke it, was Nia. "Thief," one of the guards spat as they threw her to the floor. The nobles muttered among themselves, their voices a mixture of amusement and disgust. A few laughed. One woman in a crimson turban said loudly, "She's slave blood. That kind always steals. It's in their marrow." Another leaned forward to examine the girl more closely, as if she were an insect pinned under glass. But Nia did not cower. She raised her head, slowly, deliberately, and locked eyes with the queen. The queen, resplendent in layered silks and crowned with curved bone, stared back in disdain. Her gaze was sharp, indifferent, the kind that had signed 1,000 death warrants before breakfast. Yet something in her grip tightened, barely visible, a twitch of her gloved hand. Above, concealed behind a decorative lattice carved with lion motifs, a boy peered down. No one noticed him. No one ever did. Prince Kian was only 12, too old to be a child, too young to be taken seriously. He had come here to escape tutors and protocol, to watch the court like a play, but this was no play. He had never seen someone like her. Her skin was streaked with dust and blood, her hair tangled like roots. And yet when she looked at the queen, she looked as if she were judging her, not the other way around. As if she still remembered who she used to be. As if the chains were a misunderstanding that would soon be corrected. The queen's voice rang out, smooth and cold. "Does she confess?" The guards laughed. One stepped forward with a whip. The first strike echoed. Nia's body jolted, but she didn't scream. The second landed across her shoulders. Her breath caught, but she didn't plead. By the third, blood had begun to trickle down her back, warm and steady. Still, she remained silent. "She doesn't need to confess," someone in the gallery called. "Look at her, she was born guilty." They laughed again, cruel and careless. Kian did not laugh. He was supposed to look away. He didn't. He was supposed to feel nothing. He didn't. He was supposed to forget her. But the way she held her head, the silence she clung to even as the iron was heated and pressed to her shoulder, it did something to him. When the smell of burning flesh filled the chamber, and she bit her lip until it bled rather than cry, he felt something inside him tighten, then twist. That night, long after the nobles had eaten and forgotten the girl, Kian sat alone in his chambers. He didn't eat. He didn't speak. He stared at his own hands, small and soft, and imagined them holding a whip. Imagined them dragging chains. He knew nothing about her. Not her tribe, not her age, not even her name. But he remembered her eyes. And he would never forget the silence. The palace kitchens were a kingdom of their own, a kingdom of fire, steam, and sweat. Smoke clung to every wall, and the air always smelled of crushed herbs, boiled bones, and scorched bread. Nia moved through this space like a ghost, her bare feet hardened by the stone floor, her back straight, her eyes low. No one spoke to her unless they had to. They called her girl or you or, sometimes, salt, because her silence stung worse than argument. But Nia remembered everything. She remembered the heat of the iron against her skin. The smell of her own burnt flesh. The way the queen had looked away, bored. She remembered the snickering nobles, the guards who laughed, the names they'd called her, slave blood, scavenger, mute dog. And she remembered the boy behind the lattice. The one who had stared. The only one who had not laughed. Years had passed, but memory never loosened its grip. Not even when the whippings stopped. Not even when she learned to move faster than scorn, to vanish behind silence and routine. She became invisible, and in doing so, survived. But all of it shifted the day the war drums ceased. Prince Kian returned with the red dust of conquest still in his braids. The palace prepared as if the sun itself were descending, oil was poured into golden lamps, dancers rehearsed in moonlight, and every corridor was scrubbed of any sign of age or decay. Except the kitchens. The kitchens didn't change. From behind a wooden pillar, Nia watched the soldiers arrive. Their boots struck the courtyard in unison, proud and polished. Kian rode at the front. Taller now. Broader. His jaw was lined with the beginnings of a beard, and his shoulders wore the weight of command. He was 20 now, no longer a boy peering through latticework, but a prince forged in fire. When he dismounted, nobles rushed to greet him. The queen kissed his cheeks as if she had not sent him away to bleed. And Nia turned back to her work, slicing onions with a blade duller than the lives around her. She had expected his return to mean nothing. Another ruler rising. Another man crowned by silence. But fate, as always, was waiting. 2 days later, Nia was carrying a tray of roasted figs through the royal courtyard. A display of opulence was in full motion, cloths dyed with lapis, musicians plucking at stringed instruments carved from bone, dancers spinning in sync. She moved quickly, avoiding eye contact, weaving through nobles and guards. And then her chain caught. The thin metal wrapped around her ankle had always been more symbol than shackle, rusted, dulled with age, fastened not to imprison but to remind. Yet as she turned a corner too sharply, it caught on the leg of a stone planter. There was a snap, quick, metallic. Nia froze. Her tray clattered to the ground. Figs scattered like stones, and honey spilled across the marble in golden rivulets. All eyes turned to her. And the chain lay broken. Nia looked down at it. Her breath was shallow. She could fall to her knees. Beg. Crawl. Do what slaves were supposed to do. But her legs didn't bend. Her spine refused. She stood. Every breath in the courtyard halted. She did not apologize. She did not gather the figs. She looked up and met the eyes of the prince. Kian. He had been mid-conversation, laughing at some noble's boast. But when their eyes met, the laughter died on his tongue. His brow furrowed. He took a step forward, slowly, as if unsure whether what he saw was real. For a moment, the courtyard was still. The dancers stopped spinning. The musicians faltered. A wind passed through, lifting the ends of Nia's braid and tugging at Kian's cloak. "Who is she?" a noblewoman whispered too loudly. She didn't bow. She stood, another hissed. In front of him. "She's nothing," someone else muttered. "A kitchen girl. A slave." Kian's eyes didn't leave hers. There was something gnawing at the edge of his memory, something clawing its way up through the fog of years. Her face, he had seen it before. But where? When? Nia waited. Not for forgiveness. Not for punishment. For recognition. But the moment passed. A guard stepped between them, pushing her back. The queen called for the mess to be cleared, for music to resume. The illusion stitched itself back together. Still, the whispers didn't stop. That night, in the shadowed halls of the palace, under the echo of drums and laughter, her name passed from mouth to mouth, Nia, the kitchen girl who stood before the prince and didn't kneel. And in his chambers, Kian sat at the edge of his bed, turning over a feeling he could not name. Like salt in a wound he'd forgotten he had. The wind that day had smelled of mango trees and ash. Nia was 8 when the soldiers came, barefoot and berry-lipped, chasing dragonflies through tall grass as her mother sang while grinding cassava at the edge of their clay hut. The village of Buzari was small but proud, nestled near a river so clean the fish looked like silver knives slicing through water. Children played under the baobab trees. Drums were played not for war, but for weddings and harvest blessings. There was no palace, no iron, no chains. And yet, the smoke came anyway. At first it was distant, a curl above the treetops. Then thunder. Not from the sky, but from hooves and boots and steel. She remembered the panic, how it spread faster than fire. How the ground shook as men in red and gold armor rode into the village, shouting in a tongue that did not ask for understanding, only obedience. Nia's father, Chief Adney, had stood in the village center with nothing but his staff and the necklace of red beads passed down through generations. He did not kneel. He did not beg. And for that, they cut him down. She remembered his blood as a color brighter than fire. Her mother had tried to hide her. Wrapped her in a reed mat and slid her under a pile of dried grain. But soldiers found her anyway. Her mother had screamed, tried to lie, to say the girl was not hers, anything to protect her, but they silenced her the way they silenced most women that day, with blades. When they were done, her body was left in the dirt, mouth open, tongue gone. They didn't kill Nia. They took her. That was how her story with the palace began, not with arrival, but with erasure. Now, years later, in the quiet of the royal garden, she found it again. Not the past in its full, burning shape, but a fragment. Something left behind. She had been sent to collect herbs for a court dinner. The garden was enormous, hedges shaped into lions, fountains gurgling water over carved obsidian, flowers grown from stolen seeds. But behind a crumbling wall, half hidden under a patch of overgrown weeds, something caught her eye. A carved token. Small. Bone-white. She picked it up gently. It was a smooth, circular piece of wood, worn at the edges but still marked with a distinct spiral, a sunburst carved into it by hand. Her people called it the Eye of Oko, a symbol of guidance. Children wore them for protection. Her mother had tied one into her braids the night before the fire. This was not coincidence. No one in the palace should have known this carving. It was sacred to Buzari, meaningless to the royal kingdom. Yet here it was, buried in the queen's garden. She turned it over in her palm, her breath shallow, heart pounding against her ribs like a warning drum. Someone had brought this here. Someone had kept it. Someone in this place, in this very garden, had once stood among the flames that ate her village. Had walked its ashes. Had taken something small and sacred from the ruins. Nia crouched low, staring at the token in her hand, her fingers trembling. Suddenly, it was not just the past that haunted her, but a new question: why? Why keep this? Why bury it here? And who had done it? She looked around. The garden was empty, save for the quiet rustle of wind through trees. The walls loomed tall and vine-covered. No one watched her, and yet, she felt eyes, like a cold breath on the back of her neck. For the first time since her return to the palace, her silence felt fragile. She hid the token in her sash, pressing it flat against her hip. Its presence felt like a heartbeat. A memory given shape. Proof that her life had not started in the kitchens, or on the palace floor in chains, but in the soil of a village proud and unbent. She walked back slowly, every leaf and stone now suspicious. Every noble's face, every servant's smile. She passed a guard near the herb beds and caught the flicker of recognition in his eyes, too brief to be certain. Too wrong to ignore. Someone here had burned her home. And someone else, or maybe the same, had mourned it. Her bloodline was not forgotten. Her bones were not lost. And now, they would rise. The Feast of Masks came with thunder and silk. Every year, it marked the turning of seasons, a night when the court transformed itself into myth. Nobles donned painted masks of gods and beasts. The queen wore a jackal's grin made of gold and onyx, and the king, silent as always, wore none at all. Musicians played until their fingers bled. Wine flowed like rivers. And slaves were kept hidden, locked in the underhalls, unseen, unheard. Decorations were hung, torches lit, and every surface was wiped of dust and sweat and memory. Except for Nia. This year, the queen summoned her. She was pulled from the kitchen with no warning, her apron still stained with chicken blood and yam. 2 guards marched her through the torchlit halls without explanation, until they reached the grand feast. The chamber was unrecognizable, the ivory floors covered in rose petals, the ceiling draped in black silks like a starless sky. Candles hovered in golden cages, casting flickering shadows across the jeweled faces of 100 masked nobles. And in the center, raised on a dais of polished stone, sat Prince Kian. He wore the mask of the lion, fierce, dignified, edged with obsidian and horn. Beside him sat the queen, expression unreadable beneath the jackal mask. Her eyes found Nia the moment she entered. The queen smiled. "Bring her to serve the lion." Whispers followed as Nia was dragged up the steps. Her hands trembled as she took the wine jug from a nervous steward and stood behind the prince's shoulder. She was not masked. She was not dressed in silks. Her presence was an insult to the festival's decorum, and everyone knew it. A noblewoman in a silver eagle mask leaned close to the queen and laughed. "Shall we feed her next, Majesty? Like a pet?" The queen didn't answer. Kian turned his head slightly, his brow tight beneath the lion's mane. His eyes flicked to Nia, and narrowed. But the mockery had only begun. As Nia poured wine into a guest's cup, a man in a crocodile mask waved her over, gesturing with an empty goblet. She approached without looking up, steady in her steps. Just as she tipped the jug, he moved his hand deliberately, and the wine splashed down his arm and onto his lap. A roar of laughter broke out. "You stupid creature," he bellowed. "Can't even pour like a proper animal." Before Nia could step back, the noblewoman in the eagle mask reached for her goblet, lifted it slowly, and flung the contents directly at Nia's face. The wine stung her eyes, burned in the cuts on her cheeks. Red drops slid down her chin like blood. Still, she didn't flinch. The room froze for a moment, a beat between cruelty and consequence. Kian rose from his seat. The laughter died. He turned to Nia. His voice, when it came, was low but clear enough to carry across the entire feast. "What is your name?" The queen's eyes narrowed beneath the jackal mask. The room tensed. Nia said nothing. The wine dripped from her chin onto the marble. The silence stretched. People leaned closer, waiting for a scolding, a slap, a dismissal. Perhaps she was mute. Perhaps she was too stupid to answer. But Kian didn't look away. "I asked you," he said again, more firmly, "your name. A test. Or maybe a door." Nia lifted her chin. "Nia," she said quietly. "Daughter of fire." Gasps flared across the court like sparks. It was not a name. It was a declaration. The queen's wineglass paused halfway to her lips. The crocodile-masked man cleared his throat awkwardly. The noblewoman in the eagle mask frowned, as if uncertain whether to laugh again or retreat. Kian said nothing. He only stared at her for a long moment, something ancient burning behind his eyes. Then he sat back down. And no one else threw wine. The palace at night was quieter than death. By day it sang with rustling silk and sharp-tongued laughter, but after the torches dimmed, it breathed like a thing asleep, slow, dangerous, full of hidden teeth. Kian moved through its arteries like smoke, avoiding the guards' patterns, stepping where the floor didn't creak. He wore no crown. No shoes. Only a black tunic and the restlessness of a man whose world had begun to tilt. He didn't know what he was doing. Not fully. He only knew he needed to see her again. The night after the Feast of Masks, her name had followed him. Echoed in his ears. Nia, daughter of fire. It stirred something deep, something unspoken. Her voice had not been angry. Just honest. And that honesty gnawed at the lies he'd grown up calling law. He found her in the servants' quarter, seated by a flickering oil lamp, folding cloths with mechanical precision. She didn't look up when he entered. "You shouldn't be here," she said flatly. "I know," Kian replied. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and sat opposite her, ignoring the stiff wooden stool, the chill in the air. "I want to know who you are," he said. "You already asked," she murmured. "I told you." "No," he said. "You told them." Now I want the truth. Her hands stilled. So she told him fragments. Not everything. Not the full ache. But pieces sharp enough to cut. She told him about a village beside a river. About mango trees, and a carved token worn by children, and a mother whose songs were always softest at dusk. She told him about fire, and how soldiers had come not to conquer, but to erase. She told him she had watched her father die with his eyes open. Cain didn't interrupt. He sat with his fists clenched until his knuckles ached. Until he could no longer pretend ignorance was innocence. The description matched the campaigns his mother's general had boasted about, the villages that had resisted tribute. They were labeled rebel dens. He remembered the queen laughing once, saying, "If the fire eats the roots, the weeds won't return." He had thought it was poetry. Now it felt like a confession. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I don't want your apology," Mia replied. "I want your memory." That silence between them was heavier than war drums. Later, as he slipped out the way he came, Mia turned back to the cloths, but her fingers didn't move. Her mind did. The next day, a kitchen girl named Luma cornered her behind the smokehouse. Luma was wiry, sharp-eyed, and always listening where others didn't. "You're being watched," she whispered. "The Queen's maid has been asking about you. Said you speak above your station." "I didn't," Mia replied. "Doesn't matter," Luma said. "It's not your words they fear. It's your spine." That night, Cain sent a message hidden in a fruit basket. One of the mangoes had a small slice in the skin, and inside the fold was a note no longer than a finger. The garden. Midnight. She almost didn't go. But the air was heavy, the kind that tasted like rain, and something in her blood itched to move. To see him again. The old garden had once belonged to a queen before Cain's mother, lush and wild, now half forgotten behind broken columns and cracked fountains. It smelled of jasmine and wet earth. Vines draped like curtains, and moonlight pooled in patches on the overgrown path. He was already there. When she stepped into view, he looked at her like she was the only real thing in the world. She didn't speak. Neither did he. They walked together in silence, brushing past ancient roses and wilting lilies. When they reached the old fig tree at the center, he turned to her. "You scare them," he said softly. "I know. I think you scare me, too." She didn't answer. He reached for her hand, then her face, then stopped. "I'm not allowed to want you," he whispered. "I'm not allowed to breathe," she replied. He kissed her. It wasn't sweet. It wasn't slow. It was the kind of kiss that comes after years of silence and too much blood, the kind that means I see you and I don't care what the world says. It tasted of smoke and salt and a future no one had written yet. Somewhere nearby, a lantern had been left too close to dry vines. The heat, the wind, the kiss, perhaps it was enough. The fire began at the edge of the garden. It spread slowly at first, then faster as dry leaves crackled and caught flame. Within minutes, the jasmine was burning, and shadows danced across broken statues. They pulled apart as the light exploded around them. "It's spreading," Mia said, breathless. "We should go," Cain replied, but neither of them moved right away. The garden burned behind them as they fled into the dark, two silhouettes against a backdrop of red and gold. By morning, it was ashes. Some called it an accident. Others called it arson. But those who saw the flames swore it looked like a crown melting. Or a warning made of fire. The fire in the garden did not stay in the garden. By dawn, it was in every corridor, every whispered conversation, every brutal smile that broke too easily. Servants spoke in hushed tones. Nobles shouted behind closed doors. The queen paced like a wolf in silk. Even the statues seemed to listen. The flames had devoured more than jasmine and stone, they had consumed silence. And at the heart of it all were two names, Cain and Nia. Some said they had met in secret. Others claimed they'd run off together and returned only after realizing the foolishness of their passion. One minister swore he had seen them embracing near the edge of the smoke. No one had proof, but proof no longer mattered. Only perception. And perception had turned savage. A slave, spat Lord Danvu at court, with the prince's hands on her. Not even a concubine, sneered Lady Oakary. She serves food. She scrubs floors. She stood before us all, another noble hissed. She dared to look royalty in the eye. And now she burns gardens? They demanded a response. An explanation. A punishment. The queen gave them a trial. Kian stood before the royal council, a semicircle of judges and high ministers whose robes weighed more than their conscience. Behind them sat his mother, the Queen of Teeth, they called her in the lower quarters. She wore mourning black, not for a death, but for shame. He had been dressed for the occasion like a child for a scolding, formal robe, ceremonial sandals, the lion sigil pinned to his chest. His expression, however, was anything but obedient. His jaw was set like stone. His eyes burned. "This is not a hearing," he said as he entered. "It's a performance." "It's a reckoning," the queen replied coldly. "You've embarrassed the crown." "I am the crown," he snapped. The ministers gasped. The queen narrowed her eyes. "You are the crown," she corrected. "Until you let yourself be touched by filth." He stepped forward. "Say her name." "She has no name," she spat. "She is a servant. She was taken from a dead village. We saved her." "You burned her village," Kian said, voice rising. "You buried her mother without a tongue." "Watch your tone," the head minister warned. "You are still speaking to your queen." Kian turned slowly to face the entire chamber. "You want me to renounce her? Say she tricked me. Say it was lust or madness. Say she forced me. You want me to lie to make you feel safe?" Silence. He took a breath, then said, "Then I denounce the crown." The words struck like thunder. A noblewoman fainted. Someone cursed. The queen stood sharply, her throne trembling beneath her. "You ungrateful boy," she snarled. "You would throw away generations of rule for a kitchen girl?" "No," Kian said. "I throw away nothing. I refuse to build on bones." The queen raised her hand. "Strip him," she ordered. Guards approached. They tore the lion sigil from his chest. They removed his sash. When they reached for the ring on his finger, the one his father had given him, he clenched his fists so hard blood welled from his palm. "You are no longer prince of the realm," the queen said coldly. "From this day forward, you are Kian of nothing." He said nothing in return. He only walked out of the chamber like a man shedding a skin that no longer fit. But the court wasn't done. They dragged Nia next. They had taken her from the servants' quarters, placed her in new chains, tighter than before. Her wrists were purple and raw. Her face was calm. They forced her to kneel. Kian was already waiting. When he saw her brought in like that, something broke. Not loudly, no screams, no violence. Just a quiet, final snap deep in his chest, like a rope giving out under strain. As one minister stood to pronounce judgment, Kian stepped forward. "No," he said. The guards tried to hold him back. He shoved one into a pillar. The next came swinging, and Kian ducked, grabbed the guard's spear, and used the wooden shaft to knock him off his feet. Chaos erupted. The ministers yelled. Nobles rushed for exits. The queen shouted, "Seize him!" But the remaining guards hesitated. This was their prince, or had been. And more than that, they saw the people watching from the balcony above. Servants, courtiers, commoners, eyes wide, ears open. Rebellion needs no war cry. Only a moment. Kian stood in the center of the chamber, blood on his lip, chest heaving. He dropped the spear. "You will not chain her again," he said. "Not while I still breathe." And no one moved. The palace held secrets like a serpent holds venom, deep, silent, and fatal when stirred. Nia had always known that something in this place was rotting beneath the gold, but it wasn't until she entered the restricted archives, guided by a trembling scribe who owed her more than silence, that she saw it for herself. The ledger was bound in black hide, old and brittle, hidden in a shelf marked as trade records. A mislabel. Intentional. She opened it slowly, hands steady despite the weight of what she might find. Each page held columns, dates, resources, troop movements. But as she turned to the center, the format changed. The names of villages were listed. Some crossed out. Some circled in red. Notes scrawled in the Queen's hand. Buzari, suspected of harboring dissidents. Use the fire route. Quick and complete. No survivors. Nia's breath vanished. Buzari. Her home. She flipped through faster now. Dozens of other names. Dozens of other villages. All under suspicion. All marked for cleansing. It hadn't been rebellion. It hadn't been justice. It was fear. It was preemptive control. Beneath it all, a single phrase repeated, clean the bloodlines. Secure the throne. Nia's hands tightened around the edge of the ledger until her knuckles turned white. And yet, deeper still, something else emerged, something colder. Not just rage, but recognition. She remembered a story her mother once told her. Of the House of Aloha, a peaceful ruling family generations ago. Known for justice, for song, for strange eyes that saw farther than most. A line extinguished by conquest. But her mother had not told her everything. Tucked into the back of the ledger was a note. Short. Barely legible. The last Alohan girl taken alive. A servant now, unknown to all but me. Dated the year Nia had arrived at the palace. A secret the Queen had kept. Nia was not merely a survivor. She was the end of a bloodline, or the beginning of its return. She had been born royal. She had been scrubbed clean of it. Hidden in plain sight. Watched, controlled, but not destroyed. And now the truth breathed again. She left the archives with the ledger under her arm, wrapped in cloth. She felt taller walking through the halls, though no one else could see what had shifted. The chains on her wrists had become symbols. Not of bondage, but of history, of theft. She didn't wait. That night, she entered the Queen's solar without knocking. The guards outside blinked, confused by her boldness, and let her through out of sheer disbelief. The Queen sat before a low table, sipping bitter wine, painting her nails with a red lacquer as dark as blood. When she looked up and saw Nia, she smiled. I was wondering when you'd come. Nia stepped forward and laid the ledger on the table between them. Opened it to the marked page. Buzari. The fire route. Her mother's name in the margins, Emma of Aloha, eyes too proud. You knew, Nia said. I ordered it, the Queen replied. Of course I knew. Why keep me alive? The Queen shrugged. Because I liked the idea of your line kneeling. She leaned forward, eyes glinting with amusement. You were a candle, she said softly. I was the wind. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Nia smiled, not with warmth, but with something deeper. Something older. Then you should have blown harder. The Queen laughed, a low, dangerous sound. You think you've won? No, Nia said, straightening. I think I've remembered. And that's enough for now. As Nia turned to leave, the Queen's voice followed her like a knife in the dark. They'll never bow to your blood. Nia didn't look back. They won't have to, she replied. They'll stand with it. The square had been swept clean, as if scrubbing the stone would wash away the gilt. Banners hung limp in the morning heat, their colors muted by the ash-gray sky. At the center stood the execution platform, wide, raised, draped in black. The crowd gathered early, pulled by the scent of spectacle and the promise of blood. Vendors sold fruit and roasted nuts. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders. The royal crier had announced the sentence at dawn, a traitor will fall. A slave who dared plot against the crown prince. Let justice be swift. They didn't speak her name. But everyone knew it. Nia stood in silence at the platform's edge, shackles digging into her skin. Her hair was braided tight, her face calm. She did not cry. She did not plead. The guards flanked her like statues, spears gleaming in the rising light. The queen sat in her high chair, shaded by a canopy of woven reeds, a goblet in hand. The ministers whispered beside her. Everything had been arranged to look official, lawful, righteous. But the air stank of fear. Rumors had bloomed too fast to contain. Some said Nia had poisoned the prince. Others claimed she had seduced him to steal secrets for a foreign tribe. A few whispered that she wasn't a slave at all, but a spirit sent to burn the palace from within. None of it was true. But truth had no place here. The executioner stepped forward. His axe was heavy, his hands slow. He looked at Nia and paused, as if unsure. She met his eyes, steady, unflinching. Then the murmur started. From the edge of the crowd, a figure pushed through, barefoot, cloaked in rough linen. Not a soldier. Not a noble. A peasant, it seemed. Until the guards reached for their weapons. And then stopped. Because they saw who it was. Cain. No crown. No royal sash. His face was bruised, his clothes torn. But it was him. The lion, stripped of armor, walking toward death like it was a throne. He climbed the platform without permission. The queen sat upright. "What are you doing?" she hissed. Cain didn't answer her. He walked to Nia, looked her in the eye, and dropped to his knees. Before her. The crowd gasped. "I'm sorry," he said softly, loud enough for those nearest to hear. "I failed you. I should have spoken sooner. Should have fought harder. Forgive me." Nia said nothing. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't wipe them away. Then he stood and turned to face the thousands gathered. "If she is to die," he said, voice rising, "then let me die beside her." A long silence followed. And then came the first ripple, a sound like dry leaves brushing against each other. A murmur. A shift. A question. Soldiers looked to one another, confused. They had not been told this would happen. The queen's lips curled into a snarl. "He is no longer prince," she shouted. "This changes nothing." But it had already changed. The people watched a prince fall to his knees for a slave. And in doing so, they saw something the queen had never shown: humility, grief, truth. A woman in the crowd shouted, "What was her crime?" A man beside her added, "She stood. That's all she did." Another voice, bold and clear, "Let her speak." The soldiers wavered. The executioner stepped back. The queen rose to command again, but this time her voice shook. Because she heard it, not just questions, but something worse. Doubt. And once doubt took root, even a crown couldn't crush it. It began with a stone. Not a speech. Not a horn. Not even a call to arms. Just a single stone, hurled from the edge of the crowd by a girl no older than 10. It hit a soldier's helmet with a sharp clang, and for a heartbeat, the square went still, the kind of silence that always comes before lightning splits the sky. Then came another. And another. And suddenly, the air was full of fists and dust and rage. The rebellion wasn't planned. It didn't have banners or commanders. It rose from the crowd like smoke from long-buried embers. Years of hunger, of lashes, of silence. This moment was simply the spark that let it catch fire. The people surged forward, no longer spectators to a public killing but participants in a reckoning. Soldiers stumbled back, overwhelmed not by weapons, but by sheer numbers. Market vendors grabbed their own stalls and turned them into barricades. A butcher used his cleaver to drive away a mounted guard. Even the palace dogs broke loose, barking wildly. And through it all, Nia stood on the execution platform, her hands still bound, the blade untouched. Cain rose beside her, his voice lost in the roar, his body tense. He grabbed her wrist, yanked a dagger from a fallen soldier's belt, and slashed through her chains. They fell to the ground like dead things. "They'll try to kill you now," he said. "They already did," Nia answered. They jumped from the platform into the crush of bodies. The square had become a storm, dust rising, smoke swirling, blood painting the stones beneath their feet. Somewhere above, the queen screamed orders, her voice drowned by the riot's fury. When she realized her words meant nothing, she fled, flanked by guards, disappearing through a hidden corridor at the back of the square. Kyan and Nia moved fast, dodging through back alleys and shattered gates. They would have never made it, except they weren't alone. An old steward appeared from the shadows, his face lined with years of palace dust. He gestured silently. Others followed, a stable hand who had once rocked Kyan to sleep, a scullery maid who had whispered prayers for Nia after every beating. These were not warriors. But they remembered. They remembered the king Kyan had been born to, and the woman the queen had become. They remembered kindness. And they remembered fear. They led the two fugitives through tunnels used long ago to flee invaders, only now they were fleeing something inside. By dawn, the fires in the square had dimmed. The dead had been dragged away. The wounded were wrapped in linen. And from the hills above the palace, two figures walked side by side beneath the weight of ash-colored skies. Nia and Kyan. She wore no chains now. He wore no crown. But the path beneath their feet was the royal one, carved from obsidian, lined with lion statues, once reserved only for monarchs and their gods. They didn't run. They walked. And the people watched. From broken balconies. From shattered windows. From behind ruined stalls. They watched them return not as ruler and servant, but as survivors. As something more. When they reached the palace gates, they found them flung wide. The queen had fled the night before. The ministers had either vanished or cowered behind locked doors. Power had become a torch passed too quickly between hands. Kyan stood at the threshold. He reached into the satchel strapped across his shoulder and pulled out something heavy, the golden crown, dented, stained, an heirloom forged by blood and polished by tyranny. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he threw it. The crown bounced once on the stone and rolled to a stop at the base of the gates. Dust coated it. No one moved to retrieve it. Behind him, Nia picked up a fragment of carved bone from the rubble, a shard of a fallen banner pole. She wrapped a red cloth around it, knotted it tight. A new standard. No lions. No gold. Just cloth. And purpose. Kyan turned to the people gathered behind him. "No more thrones built on graves," he said, voice hoarse. "No more lies polished into law." He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The silence that followed wasn't fearful. It was listening. Together, he and Nia walked through the gates. Not above the people. Not ahead. Among them. The hall had changed. No longer draped in silk stolen from a dozen crushed kingdoms. No longer echoing with the hollow click of gold-tipped sandals. The columns were the same stone, but new hands had carved them, hands that remembered what it meant to bow too long. The banners hanging overhead bore no lion, no jackal, no sword. Just a red cloth on a field of bone white, bound in a spiral, the Eye of Oko. A symbol from a village long buried, now raised again. The queen sat beneath it. She wore no crown. Only a braid wound with tokens, carved from wood and bone and stone. Some were new. Some had been worn by her mother. Her gown was simple, deep umber. The scars on her back, barely visible, were never covered. They had once tried to silence her with fire. Now, they built halls to hear her speak. Beside her, the king sat not taller, but equal, Kyan, whose name had once opened gates, now opened them still, though never alone. The people didn't chant his name in battle songs anymore. They whispered it in homes, quiet with reverence, as though afraid to disturb the history he chose to share. A court had gathered. Not of nobles and land barons, but of midwives and scholars, stonecutters and freed bondmen. Children sat at the edges, wide-eyed, watching not just rulers, but memory made flesh. And when those children asked their tutors about the woman who ruled without fear, they were not taught about her chains. Not first. They were taught about her silence, the silence that held when she was whipped. The silence that stared down a queen. The silence that chose to break, not with screams, but with truth. They learned of fire, not only the one that raised her village, but the one she carried inside her, ember by ember, until it burned in every voice that rose after hers. They learned her name, Mia, daughter of fire. Not born royal, but made so, by survival. The old execution platform had been taken down long ago. Its stones were used to build wells in the outer provinces. But one plank had been saved, the one where she had stood, wrists bound, eyes unbowed. It hung now above the great hall's entrance, a warning and a promise. Some days, people still came to kneel before her. Not out of obligation. Not fear. But because they had been taught to kneel before power, and it was hard to unlearn. Whenever someone did, she would rise from her seat. Walk down the steps. Take their hand. And whisper, gently. Stand. You are not lesser. And they would rise. And so would the world.